All right, I think I figured it out. Not everything, just one specific thing, sort of. So I'm always trying to understand what it is about industrial hemp, the cannabis plant, that keeps me coming back here to want to tell the stories of this industry, this hemp industry. What is it? Well, if you listen to the show, you know that I am an optimist, right? And I am deliberately an optimist. I have chosen optimism. I used to be a pessimist. It wasn't working, so I switched to optimism. It was that easy. You can do it too. Call now, find out more. No, seriously, optimism, right? So lately, I have stumbled upon this idea of determinate optimism versus indeterminate optimism. And it's, I think at the basic level, it's like planning the future versus planning for a future, right? See the difference? So what keeps me coming back here is hemp as a symbol of what agriculture can do to achieve the thing that we need to do, which is basically change our raw materials for our energy and our materials, our consumer goods. And for years now, we've been making a lot of stuff out of oil, crude oil, petroleum. And what is that really, right? Well, here, Wikipedia says that petroleum is a fossil fuel derived from fossilized organic materials such as zooplankton and algae. Yeah, plants, really old plants. So I guess what I'm suggesting now is that we just use fresher plants instead of the ones that have been in the ground for millions of years. In my optimistic view, yeah, I think we are on the path, and I am here to witness it, right? I am here to share stories of the people making it happen. So hello, my name is Eric Herlock. This is the Industrial Hemp Podcast. Welcome to episode 1 of season 4. This is the good news episode, right? But you can't have good news unless you have a little bad news. So let's just get the bad news out of the way first. Bad news is we are in for a really, really contentious political season here in America this year. I'm not really looking forward to any of it. There are wars brewing around the world. I don't like that. People are in pain. People are suffering all over the place. And it's bad news. Bad news. Also, it's tied to political stuff too. That's crazy. But then, the larger bad news story is generally, well, either the economy or the climate, or maybe it's human health. I don't know. It's all of those things. But climate is up there. It's on the list. A list of things, because what do we have to look forward to in 2024 from like a climate or weather point of view? More intense storms, flooding, weird stuff that you don't expect, like heat domes, right? Or fires, things you do expect. Fires, we expect fires now, and droughts. So yeah, that's the bad news, but this show's about the good news. Because here I am, I'm going to march into 2024 with good news for you. All right, that's what this show is today. Personally, I'll tell you good news all day long. But this show's not about me. Nah, I'm just here. I'm like your tour guide. Hello, welcome to the hemp industry, seen through the eyes of this random dude in Pennsylvania with a podcast. So, hello, I'm Eric Herlock. I work for Lancaster Farming Newspaper, the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. And here we are, episode 1, season 4. We're off to a great start already. I am feeling more playful this year. I am feeling like I want to have more fun, just in general. I've realized now at the ripe old age of 51 that playtime is good for my brain. Yeah. Anyway, I'm way off track. what's today's show about? I told you already, it's good news. What's the good news? We got a lot of good news. We got some good news. Yeah, I sing now too, apparently. All right. Before we get into the good news, I need to mention our sponsors. And in my opinion, our sponsors are also good news, right? You know, we are sponsored by I&D Hemp from Fort Benton, Montana. And they do a lot to support, the growing hemp industry. They support cooperation and communication across the industry. And last summer, they had this, I guess it was the third annual Montana Hemp Summit. They had a fundraiser auction for the Hemp Feed Coalition. The folks who are trying to make it so we can feed hemp seed to the animals. Right, because it's expensive to do that with all the hoops and things. And so Greg Necco, he's the head of marketing for I&D Hemp. He was up on stage wearing what I think was a disco ball tuxedo. He was very shimmery and he was great. He was auctioning things off. And one of the things he was auctioning was an advertising package for the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. And so people were bidding on it, because if you were the winning bidder on this, you would be on 4 episodes of our show, of this right here. And so that's what's happening right now, is that a company from British Columbia called Forever Green, makers of the KP4 hemp cutter, they bid on this package, and someone else bid and somebody else bid, and it went up, and I don't know, I think they raised like $14 million. No, that's not true. But anyway, Forever Green actually sent me some audio for their commercial. So the first ever outside sponsor message here on our show is from the folks at Forever Green. So we'll listen to that now.
The KP4 Hemp Cutter. Introducing a revolution in hemp harvesting, setting a new standard for harvesting quality, speed, and efficiency. The KP4 prepares hemp for ideal retting and easy on-field tedding, raking, and baling. Easy to maintain and designed to withstand the punishments of hemp harvesting. The KP4 Hemp Cutter. Available only at hempcutter.com.
Yeah, wow, that was cool. All right, the KP4, folks up there at Forever Green, thank you. So we'll hear that again on future episodes. And I've seen the KP4 in action cutting hemp, and it cuts hemp really good. So this very first episode of the new season is also made possible with generous support from Impactful Ventures, a public benefit investment company focused on supporting startups and other initiatives that play a vital role in addressing the adverse effects of climate change. They strive to empower those making a significant impact for a sustainable future. You can learn more at impactfulventures.org. That's MPACTFUL ventures.org. All right, so here we are. We're off to a good start for the first episode of the new season. And I addressed this in, I think, the last episode. The seasons are kind of weird here because we've been doing this show for 5.5 years, right? Started in 2018, and from August of 2018 until, I think, the end of 2021, that was just one big season, all right? And then there was season 2, that was the next year, season 3 the next year. This technically is season 4, but it's actually our 5.5 year of production, right? So that in itself is good news. And this, after all, is the good news episode. We're rolling into 2024 with deliberate optimism. And so this is our good news show. And the good news abounds. We are going to talk to Morgan Tweet from the Hemp Feed Coalition. She's got really good news to share with us. We're going to talk to Cameron McIntosh, Hempcrete builder at American Cast Hemp. He's got really good news to share with us. And maybe you remember the filmmakers Jordan and Maxwell, who are making a documentary film about industrial hemp, about the cannabis plant, really. It's called One Plant. They have got some good news to share too, so we're going to check in with them. They were actually in my neighborhood last week, so the interview with them is live and in person. And we're going to check in briefly with Patrick Atagi from the National Industrial Hemp Council of America. He's also got some good news for us too. And just a heads up, I'll be publishing a long-form interview with Patrick Atagi from the NIHC in a few weeks. All right, so that's the roadmap for today's show, and I can almost guarantee you that I'll try to stick to it as best as possible. The other good news before we start is I've been interviewing people throughout January, and I've got some cool interviews coming up to share with you over the next few weeks. And then after that, who knows where the show is going to go. I have a good feeling about this year. Why? Because I'm an optimist. Yeah. All right, so let's get into this. Cameron McIntosh, you know Cameron. He's been on the show a bunch. If you've ever been to a hemp event somewhere in North America, he may have been there talking about Hempcrete. He is from here in Pennsylvania, right up the road, actually. And he's got some really good news to share with us. Like, so good. It's good for Cameron. It's good for his business. It's good for the local hemp industry. It's good for the national hemp industry. The implications here are fantastic. So let's talk to Cameron. All right, Cameron McIntosh, how are you?
Mr. Herlock, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm putting together the first episode of the new season of the Industrial Hemp Podcast. And I'm just sort of, calling around to see good news or bad news. What do you got?
Oh man. Bad news first.
Oh no.
I've been sick for the third time in the last 6 weeks.
Oh no.
Like what kind of sure sick? Many
leprosy?
Of our listeners have probably also been sick. There's a lot of stuff going around, right?
Oh, you got some stuff?
A lot of illness.
Yeah.
A lot of ick going around.
All right.
But on a much more positive note, good news.
You have good news? You have good news.
If you're ready. Checking notes. The good news is we are finally ready to sort of announce this to the world.
Do you need a drum roll?
Maybe, yeah.
All right. Jimmy, cue the drum roll. All right, thank you. Okay, here we go.
The good news is, despite having everybody been sick for the last few weeks here, the good news is that Amerisham was notified in about August of last year that a large grant award that we had applied for with the U.S. Army on an open topic specific to sustainable building materials, that we received a fully funded direct to phase 2 award worth $1.9 million for research and for studying the ERZ Hempcrete system and methodology. So
whoa.
That's about the best news I could give you.
That's
right
amazing. And that's one of those small business innovation research grants?
Correct. Yeah.
It's $1.9 million. Holy cow. That's amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah, totally. I appreciate it. It's money for research for our specific methodology with the ERZ system. So we partnered with a couple different people. First of all, Hudson Carbon, your buddy Ben Dobson.
Yeah, hey Ben.
At Hudson Carbon, they're going to be helping us look at sort of a life cycle assessment of sorts, but based on our finished work. So all the projects that we've done doing sort of a retroactive or a forensic life cycle assessment of the,
carbon
storage potential as represented on each of our various, previous installations.
Yep.
The next thing is working with the Penn State Housing Research Center again at Penn State, Maine. That's Dr. Mamari and his team.
Okay.
To recreate the study that was done on Project PA Hemp Home by PHRC. So basically,
all right. Yeah, I've been there.
Performance monitoring and evaluation of the performance of finished, hempcrete installations. So we're going to be doing that on 6 more of our projects around the country, including Danny in Lower Sioux, and also David up in Newburyport,
Yeah.
amongst others. And then we're also going to be doing some pretty serious fire under load testing, the ASTM E119 testing with Intertech in York, PA,
Wow.
which is critical to our getting hempcrete in general, not just ERZ hempcrete, but hempcrete in general recognized by commercial code. This testing would establish us as a 1 hour rated firewall assembly. So really important, not only just for us, but for the hempcrete
Right. The whole
scene
industry.
in general. Yep.
Yeah.
And then a few other tasks related to, domesticating our binder and things like that. But yeah, really, really excited. We wrote for this grant sort of as an exercise, not thinking that we would win necessarily, but that it would just be a good exercise. And
Sure.
damn it, if it wasn't exactly what the Army was asking for
Well, let me
in this sustainable building material open topic.
yeah, let me ask you about that. Why is the Army doing this? What is the Army going to get out of, you scaling your business?
Well, this all comes back to the pledges that our government and many other governments have made to each other and to the world for carbon drawdown. Building and construction are globally responsible for 30% of our carbon emissions.
Wow.
So anyone who's looking at, okay, how are we actually going to get to carbon neutrality by 2050, or how are we actually going to do that? They're going to have to consider building materials. It's got to be part of the solution.
Yeah.
Uh, so this is what's driving, I think, in our case, renewed interest via the federal government on the carbon footprint of our infrastructure. They
Wow.
have to care about it now, Eric. It's not something that that they don't have to worry about, or that they can kind of sweep under the rug anymore. If we're going to continue building at the pace that we need to build, there's going to have to be some modernization of the materials and the methodologies that we're using to build our structures to cut into that carbon footprint.
Right. Wow.
So this again, I think, is an acknowledgement by not only the U.S. Army, but the entire Department of Defense and even the entire federal government that, they need to encourage and be interested in carbon sequestering, sustainable, renewable building technologies. It's a must now. It's not optional. So,
Right.
others that won this award, are companies looking at, low embodied carbon concretes, and other really cool building materials. So, there's a lot of renewed interest and pressure now, I think, on the different branches of the government to focus on, how are we actually going to hit these climate pledges,
Right.
and building materials has to be part of that story, I think, is what this
Absolutely.
comes down to. So,
Yeah. Well, that's great news. That's such great news. Thank you for sharing that. And this has like just wide implications for so many different sectors of the hemp industry and the building industry. And it's incredible. And this will have a direct impact on the farmers growing the hemp in the U.S., right? Because you're going to need to domesticate your herd supply too. Yeah.
well, that's always something that we've been working on. It's not necessarily part of the scope of this grant, because our focus has always been on deploying the technology, the spray application technology, and doing, all of those industry building things, Eric, like working on the residential building code. I personally put 150 plus hours of my own time as a volunteer into
Mhm.
writing the residential building code for Hempcrete. There is nothing in the IRC that says that the ERZ spray applied method is better than any other method. So it was self-serving in that I needed to have the IRC index for my own business to flourish, but selfless in that, it was to the benefit of
Right.
all of my colleagues. So
Everybody benefits.
similarly with the hemp herd, what we're focusing on now is, again, through the U.S. Hemp Building Association, is working with ASTM and the producers of hemp herd to say, hey guys, look, you really need, and Eric, you heard me say this in Montana
I did.
last year, we really need an ASTM standard for building quality hemp herd. Without it, I can tell you right now, it would be very difficult for me to get, Hempcrete specified into a federal project of any kind,
Wow.
into a federal building of any kind. So, this award does not mean that the Army is going to be buying hempcrete from me or the DoD. That's not what it means. There is a pathway to that. There is the potential that the DoD could become a customer, but the industry has a lot of growing up to do first. And that, again, Eric, as you remember me saying in Montana, when it comes to the producers, self-certifying that you've got building grade herd isn't going to cut it. That's not what we do with building materials here in the United States. Everything is, certified via ASTM, third-party testing. And the same has to be true for hemp herd for building. That's just the way it is. So, we are pushing, and any of those of you who are listening who are producers or looking at becoming, growers or producers of fiber industrial hemp, we really do need to work together, all of us, on getting to the point where we have a certification, a standard for building quality hemp herd, for animal bedding quality hemp herd, all of these things. Self-certifying and just saying that you have it based on something that someone told you, that's not going to help us get specified to do work for the U.S. government on military bases, or even just with large developers in general. That's not how it's going to go. We have to have these certifications. So again, in this award, Eric, that we got, the way that I wrote it, all of the topics that we're working on obviously are specific to the ERESI system and our methodology, but they will all be able to be cited in the larger effort to push us towards inclusion in the commercial building code. The fire under load testing, the ASTM E119. A colleague of mine, Karen Rugg, out in Oregon, did a lab scale version of that test. Got back awesome results, but it was not the full 10 foot by 10 foot test. We
Okay.
need to have this testing done to have Hempcrete recognized as a 1 hour fire rated wall assembly. Yes, this testing will be, specific to the ERESI, but it should be able to be used and cited going forward in the effort, as we join together to write the IRC, in the effort to get into the IBC. Someone has to do this testing. So again, all of it's really positive. This is great news. Obviously, big implications for
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 everybody. Yeah.
the hemp building space, for
Yeah.
hemp in general. I have to mention, because there's a certain person who'd be very upset if I didn't, that the National Hemp Association was pivotal in helping us to get this award. Not that they wrote it for us or anything like that, but they did put us in connection with some resources to help us get through that process. Some advisors who are now part of our team. So, joining and becoming a member of National Hemp Association is no small part of my success here, and I would encourage others to do the same. So,
Membership has its
um,
benefits. All right.
it
Plug for
definitely
the
does, and
NHA.
using your membership dollars to support the work that's been done by NHA, who has been very active behind the scenes in Washington for years now. This is part of the reason why the federal government is turning around and why they didn't take one look at my proposal, see the word hemp, and push it off to the side. It's the work of people like Jeff and Erica in DC that have gotten us to the point where we don't just get shrugged off. So that's really important. And if nothing else, becoming a member allows them to continue doing the work that they're doing with, Erica and Courtney and Morgan on the Hemp Feed Coalition, and all the wonderful things that are happening we really do need to support these organizations to keep moving forward. So
Absolutely.
anyway,
Yeah, you're tying it all together here.
that's
Yeah.
my soapbox.
Yeah,
I'll get
right.
off of it
Well,
now. I'll get off of it now, and I'm going to go hide now and eat my amoxicillin and try to recover.
Cameron McIntosh, it's great to talk to you. Congratulations on this. This is great news, not just for you, but for the whole industry.
Yeah, cheers, man. Thank you, as always, for the platform here and for your support and friendship. Looking forward to sharing the journey here going forward as well. And
Igualmente.
just really excited for 2024, man. It's lining up to be one hell of a year.
Buckle up, Buttercup. All right. Thanks, Cameron. Yeah, so I would say $1.9 million in grant money from the U.S. Army is good news for Americhon. It's good news for Hempcrete. It's good news for the hemp industry. Now let's continue that theme of good news. We're going to talk to Morgan Twee. You know her from IND Hemp in Fort Benton, Montana, but she's also the executive director of the Hemp Feed Coalition, and she's got really good news for us on the hemp for feed front. Morgan Twee, welcome back to the Industrial Hemp Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, Happy New Year.
Yeah, you as well.
Thanks. 2024, off to a good start.
It is.
Feeling the positive vibes.
Yeah, it feels like it's already been several months into the year. It's crazy to think we're still in January.
Still January. By the time this airs, it will still be January. Yeah, okay. Anyway, so just to reintroduce you, you are the executive director for the Hemp Feed Coalition and also CEO at IND Hemp in Fort Benton, Montana.
Correct, yes.
Yeah, and so I think you have good news to share with us. Can we start off? Just, what's the good news?
Yeah. So quick recap for those of your listeners who may not know what the Hemp Feed Coalition is. HFC is a nonprofit organization with a sole purpose and mission to open markets for hemp ingredients in the feed market. And basically that means is we're trying to get approval for ingredients to feed to animals since they're regulated more strictly than human food is. And the good news to share is we've completed a key milestone in the regulatory pathway for federal approval, specifically for hemp seed meal as an ingredient for laying hens. So we'll go into a lot more detail of what that means, but the overall conclusion, this is a big deal. We got the nod of approval from FDA and CVM, Center of Veterinary Medicine. So they have made the recommendation for approval to allow this as an ingredient. So it's a big deal, long time
awesome.
coming.
Right. Before we get into the details of that, just explain sort of what the larger implications are for the hemp industry once the animal feed markets are opened up.
Yeah, that's a great question. For those who maybe aren't as intimately aware with processing and market space, we look at hemp grain as a commodity, and we look at other commodities like soy or canola, flax, other well-known crops. What you may not know is a large portion of that material that is processed actually goes into the animal feed markets. So there are co-products in a lot of these, whether you're extracting mechanically or solvent extraction, called meal. So soybean meal, probably a lot of people know that, canola meal. So that's that leftover material once the fat is extracted. And it's a really nutritious protein supplement that a lot of feed formulators use in their rations. So every commodity or every grain, has a specific amino acid profile. And when you remove that fat or the carbohydrates or the fiber, that remaining protein is really useful in the feed markets. The reason this is so important is because by volume, you're looking at 3/4 of the material that goes into a facility or more coming out as that meal product. So if you don't have a place to sell that, you're kind of at a standstill. And so for a lot of us processors, IND Hemp being one of them, we have buyers for the oil and they want to see the oil, but we don't necessarily have a huge place to sell the meal. It's, by just its functionality and the way it tastes and is useful. It's not really a great ingredient in the human food space. But like I said, it's very nutritious. And when you look at it into feed applications, it has a really high value there. But unfortunately, to date, we have not had open regulatory pathways there. And so it's not an option for us to sell into. So it's a big deal for us to scale the industry. As we see more opportunities, renewable fuels is a big one that people are targeting, but all of that kind of hinges on whether or not you have a home for this co-product in the hemp seed meal.
Right. And with the work that you're doing now and the good news that's coming is things are starting to change. So let's talk about that.
There's a couple of things maybe to start with is every state has a feed regulator that usually works in their Department of Agriculture. And so what you may not know is that any feed products that are on the market today are usually assessed and regulated by someone in your state. They will literally pull samples of feed off of store shelves and test it against what the label says. So if you're saying your crude protein is 30% or your fat content is this, they will be testing that. So those feed regulators, they come together in a group called AFCO, and they are the ones who they use this official publication that look at ingredients that are allowed in feed. And so it's kind of a big deal. It's like the official word from your state regulators, and they all collectively come together and come to a consensus whenever new ingredients are put forth. And the official publication is kind of their Bible that they work off of. And so HFC, when we initially started, 4+ years ago, the upper echelons of regulatory pathway we were going after was this official publication and getting an ingredient definition into that book. And so the steps to get there is you put forth an ingredient definition application. You have to define the ingredient. So you have to say, what is the feed, what is the protein content, the fat, fiber, etc. You have to qualify any contaminants. So like mercury, lead, aflatoxins. In this scenario, cannabinoids are considered a contaminant. And then you have to talk about utility, right? So in your target species, what are you using it for? Are you using it for a protein source, a fat source? And then does it do what you say it does, right? So you have to prove that it is efficacious. You have to describe the manufacturing. So we went into great detail on how does one get hemp seed meal? What are good manufacturers practicing? So we, had a committee of a lot of other industry partners across the United States that contributed into that manufacturing definition. And then you have to do a human safety analysis. So essentially, since your species is creating a human food byproduct, in this case, laying hens or making eggs, you have to do an analysis to make sure that there's no impact to the human food safety as well. So there's several, key categories that we had to get feedback from the industry, make sure that we were representing the industry at large. This isn't specific to an individual process or processor. That we defined the ingredient well, made sure that we created thresholds and ranges. We wanted to be as inclusive as possible. So, we used the last several years to get samples of hemp seed meal from several processors, different genetics, things like that. So that, like we said, we try to be as broad as possible to get the widest definition. So.
Okay, so you've got that definition, and they accepted that definition, and that's like in their book now?
I wish I could tell you, yes, it was, but it's unfortunately a little bit more of a process.
Okay.
I will keep my opinion to myself on the process for now, and just wear my HFC hat. But how that went is once we finished the application, we submitted it. We have an ingredient investigator that is specific in AFCO. They are part of this ingredient definition committee. And so we are fortunate, our investigator, her name's Felina Hutchinson. She's actually here in Montana. So that made that very
cool.
Easy. We have a great working relationship. And so once she reviewed the application, she didn't have any concerns. They actually kick it over to FDA and CVM. They're really the experts. They have the team to look at those applications in detail. They have a chemist, they have someone who's specific for laying hens. They have someone specific for the human food assessment. And so over the last 3 years, we have been doing a back and forth conversation with FDA CVM. So AFCO really hasn't been too involved in the interim. It's mostly been a conversation with us and FDA CVM. And if you look, HFC has a great graphic that we have both on our website and our social media platforms. It's a timeline that depicts this back and forth. So FDA has 180 days to respond whenever you submit any sort of communication to them. And then they'll, after that 100 days, they can do it before, but it's not very likely that they are to respond to us before the 180 days. But they'll come back with questions, and then it's on us to answer those questions. So the thing that's taken the longest is there was a lot of questions around this cannabinoid content and potential risk. Since FDA, human food FDA has not declared what they say as like an allowable limit for cannabinoids in human consumption, CVM was really hesitant to really play a role in that, and they wanted to make sure that we had no cannabinoid transference happening from the meal to the eggs. If your listeners may not know, but cannabinoids are considered a contaminant in this ingredient because they're not generally, the plant physiology. They don't accumulate in the grain itself.
Right.
But there is a contamination that happens because cannabinoids are most prevalent in those bracts. If the grain is not cleaned well enough, you'll have additional cannabinoids that could potentially make its way into these grain ingredients. So we had to assess that. What was the risk? We had to qualify the cannabinoid method. So we had to work with a laboratory partner, which in this case was Eurofence. They did a fantastic job of answering FDA's questions. They actually had to do a whole new methodology to test at lower levels of detection and quantification. So that added a bunch of time to it. And then we actually had to do a feed study. So we worked with our partners, Wanger Feeds. They're a feed company out of Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And we worked with them. They had to do 2 different feed analysis, and we had to capture eggs and make sure that we quantified the cannabinoids. If they were in the eggs, what were they? But we did 24 eggs, didn't find any cannabinoids that were there. It's a hypothesis that we had known for quite a while, and unfortunately just had to continue to put forth data in front of FDA until they were comfortable accepting that. So.
Okay, so what's the next step now? Like, if this feels like good news, but it also feels like we're not quite out of the woods yet.
Yeah. So I probably didn't actually answer your last question. I just keep going off into the details. So what happened was, so FDA and CVM, we went this back and forth, right? And like I said, look at the graphic, does a great job. And they have recommended a tentative definition to AFCO. So in typical bureaucratic fashion, no one wants to be the one that puts their name on it. And so they did not approve the ingredient. That's not what FDA CVM does, but they did recommend approval from AFCO. So To me, it's a little bit of passing the buck, but we'll follow the process. We'll do what they say. We have a good working relationship with FDA CVM. And so they did recommend an ingredient definition. So I do want, we have the application ingredient on our website as well, if you want to see the technical definition that was submitted to AFCO. So AFCO had their mid-year meeting just last week. We had 2 of our board members, Wendy Mosier with New West Genetics and Bill Bookout with National Animal Supplement Committee, were both in attendance. And that definition was put forth to the ingredient definition committee. Basically, right, all of those state regulators who are the ones who are physically, checking and making sure that their feed manufacturers are compliant, they all sit around a round table. They look at these definitions and they hash it out whether or not they approve or don't approve. The good news is it was unanimous. There was no pushback from any of the regulators. They all accepted this tentative definition. There was one state that did abstain from voting. That would be Idaho. For their own reasons.
Sure.
But to me, that's still a unanimous consensus that there was no concerns about the definition. So that's the good news today, is that this hemp seed meal for laying hens did get a tentative definition.
So awesome. All right. So I imagine once Well, I mean, what's the timeline? When is this? When do we actually have like all of the good news?
Yeah. So I was a little, I jumped the gun a little bit myself. I thought that like we answered FDA's questions, like what is there to do, right? That was the end all be all. AFCO would tell you that they defer to FDA CVM, but unfortunately there's just these hoops that we do have to continue to jump over. So we had the mid-year meeting. The definition has been accepted by IDC, so a committee. Since it approved there, now it gets pushed up to AFCO board. They will meet sometime this spring when they have their business meeting, and they will also vote on the definition, the tentative definition. From there, if it gets approved, it will go to the broader AFCO membership for vote, which that happens at the all hands meeting in August in San Antonio. So that's the big one we need the vote on. I was just on the call with our ingredient investigator, Felina, this morning, just to double check, hey, what's the feel here? And really no one expects there to be any pushback. There might be some questions that need to be answered of just like, hey, how do we test for this? What are these thresholds? What do they mean? So we can go into that a little bit more. But there's really no, right now, there doesn't look like any real concern whether or not that'll pass or not. So per that approval, we will get a tentative definition into the official publication. So at that vote, and I clarified this with Pauline this morning, as soon as that vote has passed, processors like myself can start marketing and selling hemp seed meal to laying hens that moment. So I was hopeful that it was going to happen in January. It looks like we're going to be targeting August, but that's okay. That gives us some time to hopefully ramp up and work with processors and talk about, how do we enter the market. The real process, so once it gets voted, then it will go into the official publication as a tentative ingredient. Once it's in there for 90 days, then you go back through the process again, but now instead of tentative, it's the official definition. So again, you go through IDC votes on it, goes to the board votes on it, and then it goes to membership, and the membership that votes on it of the official definition. But to me, that's just a long way of saying is we got to keep people employed. We got to keep the process. This is our government at work.
Yeah. Well, all right. So once that definition is approved, now is that just for laying hens? And then do you have to get that another definition approved for every other species that might possibly eat hemp seed meal? Or once you get that definition, does that make the process easier for other livestock?
So yes and no. Good question. Technically, we do have to go through this process for all ingredients, all species. But that doesn't mean it has to be as slow as this one. Like this ingredient really was the foundation to a lot of other ingredient applications. We will be doing species amendments. So basically, hemp seed meal as an ingredient will be defined. So we don't have to go back through and talk about how it was manufactured. We don't have to talk about, the nutritional value and things like that. But we'll just amend of like, okay, now using hemp seed meal for ruminants or for broilers or other species that we think this will be a good ingredient to. It's to be determined how stringent FDA CVM will be on these feed experiments, right? We had to do these trials to show efficacy and safety and whatnot. So TBD, whether or not we can just look at literature or we'll have to actually do additional feed studies. Unfortunately, I think I'm a little pessimistic now that I've been through it. I do feel like FDA is going to continue to ask for those feed studies, which is why we really need more companies to engage with us as ingredient champions. And we can talk about what that looks like a little bit more. But I do think this is the first domino that's really going to help us, break through on additional studies and we can expedite the timeline.
Cool. So I'll put that down as good news. It feels like good news going into 2024, feeling positive. So that's awesome. Let's talk about how a company can become an ingredient champion and what that means.
Yeah. So, for HFC, we're all volunteers and, 501c3. And we look for partners to really help us in, addressing the questions. Round numbers sake, it cost us about $300,000 to do the study, to get the literature review, to get the application put together and submitted. We do hire a couple consultants along the way just to make sure, I'm not a PhD that knows the process super well. Obviously, I've learned a lot, and I definitely feel more prepared now. But there is definitely a time and a place that we should be talking to experts and pulling together the right information so we can answer those questions, quicker, and get the applications through a little bit faster. The big ones, though, are those feed studies. And so if we just take the laying hens, for example, it costs, our partner was Wenger Feeds and Kreider as well. They were the ones who funded the feed study. And that is a lot on a company to not only put together the feed study, but also to have those conversations with FDA CVM to make sure that the study is tailored specifically to the questions that they ask, making sure that we're getting the different feed rations so we can see, from a range of 0% inclusion to whatever the recommended inclusion rate is. And so that's really important for us to work with good partners, cost money and time. But then we know that we're putting forth an application that is going to be solid, that we're not going to have any pushback, and we're going to have all the questions answered ahead of time.
Cool. And Kreider's, they have a brand here called Chickies Creek, and they sell hemp-fed eggs here just in the borders of Pennsylvania. So once this gets national approval, they'll be able to market their eggs nationwide, I guess.
Yeah. And that's key. I can't say enough how great those partners were. We actually took eggs from that commercial operation in this last round of discussions with CVM and used their commercial feeding to answer those questions like, hey, can we just double check that there's no cannabinoids in the eggs? And that's what I said when we pulled those additional 24 eggs and ran those analysis. So I think if I were to talk to, companies today, to me, an ingredient champion can look like a Kreider, right? Someone who's going to have a direct marketable product and sell of the ingredient or the co-product, but also manufacturers like I&D Hemp, right? We have a vested interest in growing the hemp seed market, and that includes hemp seed meal. And so it's a big deal for us to be able to continue to add value in the supply chain. And so that's why we invested, not only did we pay for the gap assessment, that was part of the ingredient application, but obviously my time and my energy, behind all of this. So I think that it's not just people who are, selling, if dairy is the next one on the table and we look at, dairy operations that want to use this as a feed ingredient. It's also, consumer products. Like if you have a butter, right, that you want to get dairy into because you have like a hemp butter that you want to make. Or any sort of retail products, like it really is, it's amazing how wide the footprint is for feed markets and where those are at. A lot of people are touched by it that they don't necessarily recognize. So, we are asking for, sizable donations and contributions for those champions. But hopefully HFC does a good job in getting you guys your value out of it. Obviously, getting the application approved is the largest value we can give you, and we work really hard to make that happen. But we also try to do a good job of highlighting our partners, in our press releases, on our website and our blogs, and talking with our members. We really try, if you look at our social media, we try to push out our partners to continue to give them presence. So hopefully, there's some market opportunity there that people also see as well.
Sure. And the best way for people to reach you is through the website, and I'll put a link to that on the show page for the episode. I'll even include an information email if that helps too.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
And this might be reiterating a little bit, but can you talk about how getting hemp seed meal approved for livestock, how that will directly benefit farmers?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, rough numbers sake, let's just take, for every 100 pounds of seed that comes off of a farmer's field, about 75 pounds of that is this protein byproduct. You can only, the application was specifically for mechanically extracted oil, since on the market today, that's mostly what people are doing. And so there's only so much oil you can squeeze out of a seed, right? And then that remaining byproduct, that's, like I said, 3/4 of the material that's coming off of it. So if I'm a farmer and I'm looking at that 100 pounds that came off of my acreage, or 1,000, right? Hopefully we're harvesting about 1,000 pounds an acre on those grain genetics. If only 750 of it, if only 250 of it is going to this higher valued market, be it hemp seed oil, the overall price of the grain that farmer will be able to receive is going to be dictated onto those end markets of what that processor can also receive for it. So if 750 pounds of that 1,000 pounds that came off doesn't have a home, or has a home, but it's really low value because you're having to basically, sell it in off markets or someplace else. I know, some people use it as a soil amendment, right? They can't sell it to farmers for animals. And so they're literally just putting it back into the soil. So these are really low value markets. But as soon as I turn on with an opportunity to sell it to someone for feed, and I can get, let's, hope it's 35 cents a pound or something like that. That is a game changer for a farmer and what they can valorize their field on. So long term, I do think that this is just going to help us with our economies of scale, and we'll continue to see competitive pricing for hemp grain. But this is part of that supply chain stability that we need to have established in order for this grain to really, turn on as a commodity, because processors need to have the confidence that they can sell those byproducts just as much as they can, the main co-products. And then that will absolutely trickle down to the value proposition they're giving to those farmers.
Awesome. So let's talk about the ingredient definition.
Yes. So if you go on, so FDA had a specific ingredient definition that will be what is put in the official publication. So like every word is looked over, very specifically. They want to make sure they have it right. So if it's okay with you, I'm just going to read it, and then I'll talk a little bit about what that means. So new tentative definition T71.5, hemp seed meal mechanical extracted, is the product obtained by grinding or milling the cake, which remains after most of the oil is removed from the seeds of cannabis sativa L by a mechanical extraction process. The ingredient must be labeled with guarantees for minimum crude protein and maximum crude fat on an as-fed basis. The meal shall contain no more than 20 ppm of total cannabidiol. Total CBD equals CBD plus CBDA times 0.877, and no more than 2 ppm of total tetrahydrocannabinol. Total THC equals delta 9 THC plus THCA times 0.877. It is used in diets of laying hens as a source of protein and fat at an inclusion of no more than 20% of the diet. So I'll break that up into some key things. I'll start with the end where it talks about this is used in a diet of laying hens, obviously the target species, as a protein and fat source. So we're looking both at the amino acid profile and the energy content from the meal, and then at an inclusion of no more than 20% of the diet. So that inclusion rate was based off of the feed trials that our partner did. And 20% is pretty standard in a lot of meals. There's actually some of them that are less than that. And we really see for efficacy and palatability, it kind of tapers off after that 20% inclusion. So I think that was the right amount. Obviously, from a feed formulator's perspective, you want to use the inclusion rate that gives you whatever attribute you're looking for, fat or energy or whatnot. As a hemp manufacturer, I'd like to see as much inclusion of hemp as possible. So 20% is a pretty good common ground. The ingredient will have a minimum crude protein, and it'll have a maximum crude fat. And so that is something that will be on the labels. And we establish those thresholds off of looking at all of these samples and these certificates of analysis that we got from different hemp manufacturers to make sure basically we defined the protein as low as we thought was possible, just like I said, to give that wide range. Right. And then we did the fat as high as possible since it's a maximum crude fat. So those values have been submitted. If I remember, I think it's like 24% for protein and like 12% for fat, but don't quote me. I can give you those updated numbers. Typically, just for averages, we saw average crude protein around 30%, and we saw average crude fat around 10%. So that's what most processors are going to be around that range. And feed formulators obviously are going to want to know that before they include it in their ration. And then now the part about the cannabinoids. So this is a sticking point for the industry and for AFCO and FDA CVM. I did push back as we got this back from FDA CVM and their recommendation. I did push back because we would support, we would have samples that would support for higher thresholds. There's also an argument on a global standard. There's already been recommendations from pharmacological groups, but they've been looking at human food safety, and they have recommended 75 parts per million for CBD. So this 20 ppm is obviously lower than that. The other thing is this is a total CBD. So it's basically CBD with the precursor, the CBDA. My argument back to CVM was we don't have information that supports, or literature that would support, that the metabolism of the animal in question, converts that acid into CBD to then make it a risk of increasing concentration. But we don't, in their responses, we don't have data or literature that points that it doesn't do that either. So they're obviously going to take the conservative approach. They want to make sure that we're mitigating that risk, and so they've asked for us to include total CBD. I did ask if we could get that amended, and their response was we needed to have a feed study that showed higher levels if we wanted to support an increase in those contaminant thresholds. For full transparency, the meal that was used in the ingredient application had a total CBD content around 15 ppm. And that was just, meal that was sourced on the market. There wasn't anything special about it. And so their request for us to show higher levels, that's basically asking us to dose that feed with higher cannabinoids. And that's not the right pathway, in my opinion, because now it's no longer hemp seed meal, it's hemp seed meal plus whatever CBD concentrate you dosed it with.
Right.
So that's a sticking point for the industry. I don't know how we're going to overcome that. Like I said, we've already had conversations. I believe that it will get discussed at the AFCO meeting because, one, we're worried that that's too low of a threshold, and two, there's a lot of labs that can't test to that threshold. So the 20 ppm for total CBD, and then the 2 ppm for total THC. Another kind of good data point to your listeners to look at is the GRAS definition that was put forth in 2008 was for humans, but it had a total THC threshold of 10 ppm. So we're obviously lower than that.
And that's generally regarded as safe for human consumption. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So I personally think that this is too tight of a threshold. I think that they are being overly conservative, but I also can't argue with them that the data that was put forth, right, the tests that we had in the feed study did support this, right? That meal that was used to support those eggs did meet these thresholds. And so as a board and as a committee, we talk about what do we want next step. If there are people in the industry that are like really wanting to push back on this, like I'd really encourage them to reach out to us. Maybe there's something we can work on. Maybe there's another feed study we need to do. Maybe there's data we can support. So that could be an ask for your listeners if they want to include. We would need additional certificates of analysis. We'd have to be able to justify to FDA CVM that we continue to show that the contaminants or the cannabinoids do not make their way into the eggs. So there's a little bit of work that needs to be done there.
Okay. But if listeners are interested in becoming an ingredient champion, reach out to the Hemp Feed Coalition.
Correct. Yes. Thanks for letting me dive into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know there's talk of like raising the THC limit for the definition of industrial hemp. Would that have any bearing on this feed conversation if they were to raise it from 0.3% THC up to 1%?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think there's a little bit of dialogue around that. I think that the risk is there, right? If as an industry, we're going to start allowing genetics to have higher THC content, 1% or higher, there is a risk that we're going to see higher levels of cannabinoids in general make their way to these grain species or these grain cultivars and then make their way to the feed ingredient. But what I also see happening is that the grain varieties that are successful, that are being bred for, their yields, their drought resistance, their maturity, all of these things, those historically have been very low in cannabinoid content anyways. So I think that the greater industry that is pushing for higher THC levels in industrial hemp are processors and buyers and whatnot that are more focused on floral content.
Sure.
And so I don't know if that's going to make its way to grain ingredients. I would caution, though, that if there are genetics companies or things that are looking to increase their THC content, to recognize that could be a potential risk for your buyers and for your farmers, that they may not be able to enter into this feed market, right? They have to be able to show that those hemp seed meal ingredients don't go above that 2 ppm threshold. And there may just be inherent risk that as we increase those content, that we're going to see increased contamination levels.
Okay, something to think about. Yeah, so let's look forward here. What are the next steps? What are the bright lights?
Yeah, so we're obviously going to continue to support this application. We'll likely have people at the meeting in San Antonio later this year to make sure that this gets the final approval from AFCO. We are working on some blogs and some information for our members so that they understand, what does this mean? What are the market potentials? We're going to be doing a kind of a deeper dive into the economic impact. We touched on it here today. If there are people who are looking to sell their hemp seed meal, becoming an HFC member and supporting what we do here, we'll hopefully connect you with buyers and hopefully grow your footprint there. We do have broilers and ruminants on the horizon for us. We're working on a couple white papers to support an amendment to an application. So we'll be talking to CVM about what additional information is needed there. But we're really pushing for those to be the next species in terms of hemp seed meal ingredient to be targeted. There's already a lot of data out there for ruminants. A lot of North Dakota State University has done work. Oregon State University has done work. We actually have a member zone on our website where we pull together all publications. So anything across the world that has been published regarding hemp ingredients in feed, we pull all of that together, have the publications, organized by species and ingredient. And then we also do an executive summary. So a lot of people, either don't have the time or really the bandwidth to understand, these complicated, journals. And so we do an executive summary. That's kind of a service we provide. Basically give you the highlights, right? What did the study look at? What were their concerns or conclusions? HFC, we don't have a lot of income opportunities. And so this is one way that that is a higher cost membership. But I think it has a huge value proposition if you're looking at it. So hopefully you see it as an investment for your company. We continue to update that member zone quite often. And then as far as ingredients, the next ingredient we're looking at is hemp seed oil. So we're looking at it for an energy source. Because of the nature of cannabinoids, we actually expect to see more cannabinoids present in hemp seed oil. They're hydrophilic in nature. And so we'll have to define, the manufacturing process. We'll have to define what those thresholds are and whatnot. So there's a little bit more work to be done for hemp seed oil. But then the first species we'll target is equine. We see a lot of people looking at hemp seed oil for an equine supplement, IND hemp included. And I think that there's giant opportunities from a nutritional standpoint to do that. I know you had Kristen Ely on later last year.
Yeah, I think October we spoke. Yeah.
Yeah. So she did an analysis on, the effects on inflammation. And I think that's a great opportunity for the hemp market to grow into.
Right. So. Why do you expect the hemp seed oil to have a little more cannabinoid content?
Yeah. So when you press the seed, like I said, the cannabinoids, their nature is to go with the fat. And that's just how they are, right? The ions and the carbons, how they are. I don't know my organic chemistry well enough to tell you that, but I know that we find them in the fat.
Okay.
And so that shouldn't scare people. I think that's probably the biggest thing, is just because cannabinoids are there doesn't mean it's a bad thing. We just need to establish where is the limit for what I would call naturally occurring cannabinoids. there's something that just naturally is going to be there. And then there's obviously an amount where people, spike it with cannabinoids or add it. And so, there's still opportunity for states. I would encourage states to look at, policies, especially for these non-consumptive animals. Let's talk about pet food, equine, right? No one's eating horse around here.
Well, not in this country, but yeah.
Yes. So, I think there's an opportunity. Montana did that a couple years ago. We have a policy that allows us to get into the market, and their definition, clearly calls out those naturally occurring cannabinoids. So we just have to quantify that now and understand what it is. The horse market actually is pretty interesting. The Racing Commission has taken a pretty hard stance against cannabinoids. And so a lot of like elite performance horses, the racetrack and whatnot, they see it as an enhancement, like a drug. And so we have to work through that. And we have to educate the commissioners on that. I don't believe that it is a drug, and I don't believe that it should be tested or evaluated as such, but we have to continue to educate them and push back, and hopefully be able to incorporate those ingredients for those performance horses as well.
Yeah, cool. And I guess it's anecdotal, but humans and other animals have been eating hemp seed for a long time. There's some aspects of our biology that indicate that we sort of evolved with this plant, not just humans, but other animals. So I don't know.
Yeah. And I was in Europe last spring and meeting with the European Industrial Hemp Association over there, and then also some pretty well-established hemp processors, in France and Belgium and whatnot. And we talked about animal feed, right? Because it's something that's near and dear to my heart, something we've worked really hard on. And they don't have the same regulatory restrictions that we have. They've been selling into feed markets forever. It's kind of like a no-brainer for them. Like when I talk to them about what we're having to do, they're like, oh wow, like I hope your people don't talk with our people and start making
don't screw this up for us too. Yeah. Wow.
And that is a point. A lot of people are going to be looking at this definition, and that's why I think there's going to be pushback on the threshold, because this is sort of setting the stage. We're members of the Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance. We already know that CFIA is going to be looking at this, and I'm not saying they're going to follow exactly suit, but there's a lot of anecdotal information of people kind of look to the US for us to set standards. And so there's always concern that, are we setting the bar too low, right? Or too high, I guess I should say, right?
Right.
With too low of threshold. So I'm happy and super proud of the work. I can't give enough credit to my board members who've just had the tenacity to hang in there and keep after this. And really thankful for our partners, Wanger and Eurofins. These groups have just really, they understand the long game here. So it's been a long time coming, a lot of hard work, and I am excited to be able to say that I do think this is a really bright light. There's a lot of things that are going to be coming off of it, and people starting to recognize that hemp is an ingredient that they should be, sourcing. So.
Yeah. And it's important to get it right. I know it's like frustratingly, it's taking a long time, but you want to get it right. Because if you don't get it quite right, maybe there will be loopholes that could be exploited or unintended consequences. Sort of maybe what we saw with 2018 Farm Bill and sort of the explosion of, what are they called, synthetic cannabinoids. But anyway, I digress.
No, you're absolutely right. And it's, us in the hemp industry, that's, we know that all too well, that if there is a loophole, people will find it and they will exploit it. So yeah. I would love to say we've checked all of our boxes and we know that won't happen, but I don't have a crystal ball. I can't see that. But I do think that the broader industry needs to do a better job of just holding ourselves to the higher standard of doing good work, of not trying to manipulate the system, the processes in place. There's definitely room for improvement in the process, I would say. I think our board is a little discouraged with this kind of jumping through the hoops. Like, we've answered FDA's questions. In my opinion, that was the hardest thing to do. That was the level that we needed to get to. The fact that there's a minimum of 6 months now before I can actually get the tentative definition in the official publication, and no one can tell me that like anything's going to change between now and then. There's no more additional information. There's no more questions answered. Like, we're literally just waiting on a process and a vote. I'm irritated with that. So it's not an individual person I'm irritated with, it's the process. So I do think that there's an opportunity here for us to, raise a red flag that like, this is not appropriate. This is withholding, the industry back. This is limiting farmers. This is, definitely affecting, your domestic supply of feed ingredients and, of domestic production of hemp. So there's definitely still room to improve.
Yeah. All right. Well, Morgan Tweet, it is great to talk to you again. Congratulations on all of this, and thank you for all of the hard work that you're putting in here and your team at HFC. It's really just important work, and so thank you.
Great. Well, thanks for having me on, Eric. I'm excited to share it with you. You've been one of those people who's hung in there with us and checked in on us on the way, but hopefully we'll have more of these conversations in the future.
I hope so. All right, Morgan Tweet from the Hemp Feed Coalition. Be sure to get in touch with them if you can help, because they can really use your help. All right, next we're going to have a quick call with Patrick Atagi from the NIHC. Patrick Atagi, President and CEO of the National Industrial Hemp Council of America. Thanks for taking my call. I know you're busy, so I'll just sort of cut to the chase. Good news and bad news. First, give me the bad news.
Well, bad news is, if I may put it, in the terms of comedian Rodney Dangerfield, we're not getting any respect.
I mean, that's the story of my life. No respect. I don't get no respect at all.
That started off with 2019 gangbusters, and then, leading into now we have to regulate this new crop. It's legal now. And what does that mean? That has led to a lot of Delta 8 discussion, intoxicants and all these other, and then we have the food and fiber side. So that was the bad news.
Okay, so what's the good news though?
Well, the good news is we are getting respect, right? The U.S. Department of Agriculture recognized the National Industrial Hemp Council as a cooperator, which means that now we are on par with 75 plus other commodities, cotton, blueberries, apples. You can look on the USDA website for MAP cooperators. Now we are named cooperator. That also leads to us being able to apply for certain grants, like the $1.2 billion announced by the Secretary of Agriculture for Regional Agricultural Promotion Program. So we're about to submit that on Thursday. So, it's very exciting news. We are starting our fourth year. We were re-upped again for market access program for over $200,000, and that will, pay for, a trip to Prague for the European Industrial Hemp Association. We're working with Morris Spiegel and WAPA to send a delegation, American delegation. So cool. Very exciting news, and yeah. Great.
Awesome. That is a lot of great news there. So 2024, off to a good start.
Off to a great start.
Yeah. So you and I are going to have a full-length interview in a couple of weeks, and we're going to get into all sorts of stuff about the great work you're doing there at the National Industrial Hemp Council of America. And we're going to talk about the top industry priorities going into what hopefully will be another Farm Bill year, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a positive. People look at it as a negative, but it's positive. We have an opportunity.
Yep. Yeah. A little more time. So anyway, I look forward to that call. So I know you're busy, so I'll let you get back to doing your important work. Patrick Atagi from the National Industrial Hemp Council of America. Thank you.
Thank you.
The good news just continues here. Right now, my good news is that I'm in the podcast studio in Ephrata with Tennessee filmmakers from Sunflower Films, Jordan Berger and Maxwell Duryea. They're working on One Plant. It's a documentary film about the cannabis plant. Right, and listeners know about this because they've been on our show before. And but here we are. I've met you guys almost 2 years ago. You've been filming a lot. No, you've interviewed a lot of people in the space. So what's happening now? Like, is there good news on the One Plant film front?
Yeah, I mean, the good news is we're still making the thing. 2 years went by very fast, but I think we finally see the light at the end of the tunnel with this thing. We recently hired a full-time editor for the year. So that's like a nice thing that, as we're here with you, we know that someone's back home
Doing the work.
doing the real work. So we just get to go have fun and chat with you.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been a whirlwind of things, and yeah, we appreciate you kind of introducing us to a lot of your listeners as well. And I'm sure some of these people we've taken up their time, and we've learned about their journey and everything. And so it's just been kind of a whirlwind of a couple years, but also really informative. And yeah, we're so lucky to still be doing this project, and we feel like we're welcome into the hemp world kind of on a outside perspective, which has been really fun.
Right. But if there's not a film at some point, they're going to kick you out, right? They're going to be like, no, man, it's been 7 years. You keep talking about this film, but
we have to deliver. You're right.
This is true.
And you will. This is it's coming along.
Yeah, no, we're going to this year. I mean, our goal is to have this thing wrapped up by the end of 2024. So
awesome.
It's exciting. Finally see the light. Like I said, it's a huge story. I mean, we could keep filming for 7 years easily. And there's just as you know, Eric, an endless kind of pot of stories. Just the hemp plant keeps throwing new opportunities and new interesting people. And, at some point we just got to say, okay, we just got to cut it off because there's so many stories to tell.
Who is your intended audience for this film?
Since the beginning, we've wanted to appeal to just the general public. I think this is not for the hempster crowd necessarily. It's, these people have already drank the Kool-Aid, as Ken Elliott likes to say. So we want to get people that don't know anything about this plant, that think it's just, a drug, and they don't really realize that it can do so much for our planet and our health.
You travel a lot for this. You're talking to people all over. Just give me the highlights from last year. Where did you go? Who did you see?
Highlights. Well, I'm not really. Yeah, I mean, that's another more of like a visual map. Google sent me like where I had been the whole year, and I was like, I guess we did go all over the place. Really, it's taken us from coast to coast and everywhere in between. There is something kind of magical about Fort Benton, Montana, and I don't think that I can put exactly why. And it's not necessarily that IND is there or the Elliots or whatever, but for whatever reason, that place just has like this kind of small town America. There's something really sweet about that and endearing, and I don't know. I would say that is kind of like we always love going back there.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Cool. All right. So I know you're busy. I'm busy. So we'll just keep it short to the good news, right? So
yeah, the good news is that we're going to have a film at the end of 2024.
Excellent.
And that's exciting.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you for being here. And thank you for, including me on part of your journey. It's great.
Hey, thanks for also always, getting updates from us and sharing it with your community.
I guess like the other good news is that, part of us being here is also trying to continue with our script of getting kind of a voiceover. And now we're at this like kind of final place that maybe you might play a role, which is also good news. I think we've been back and forth about how that might work. And within the last month or two, we've had some bigger clarity of like how this is actually going to be. And so, just kind of going over it with you this morning, I think that's good news for us.
Cool.
Eric, you are the voice of hemp, and we can't think of anyone else that could do the voiceover.
Well, yeah. Well, I'm honored to be a part of it. It's great. It's good work. Thank you for asking me.
Heck yeah.
So
let's go do the thing. Let's get it finished.
All right. Let's, we'll play you out on the ukulele, right?
Oh, that's nice. Should we just leave?
You just start singing. You have to start singing. And then, get out of here.
Can we slam the door? And
let's see how that works. Anyway.
We can't sing.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks, guys.
Hey, thank you.
Yep. Awesome. Thanks, sir.
All right. Bye-bye. All right, there. We did it. We got to the end of the show. Thank you for accompanying me on this journey of good news. So I know there's more good news out there, and if you have some to share with me, please get in touch. You can always send an email to podcast@lancasterfarming.com. Yeah, and I have heard from some of you during this break. And so thank you for checking in on me. I appreciate that. Talking about Catherine down there in Maryland and Ray up there in Alaska. And also I heard from some new listeners. So yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate you all. And what else? What other good news is there? Well, the good news is that I've got a bunch of cool interviews already recorded, and I'm going to get those out to you in the next few weeks. Who will I be talking to? Well, I'm talking to Patrick Atagi. We're going to go in deep on what it is that the National Industrial Hemp Council of America does. We're going to talk to Robert Hoban. He just recently published a 5-part series about industrial hemp on Forbes.com. I also talked to Scott Evans from Panda Biotech, and that's actually going to be the interview coming up next week. All right, so a lot in store for you, and I've got some plans for the year, some cool stuff happening. So again, thank you for joining me on this crazy journey through the world of industrial hemp. So thank you for listening. My name is Eric Herlock. I am the digital editor at Lancaster Farming Newspaper, the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. Check us out online at lancasterfarming.com, and be sure to go to the show page for this episode so you can click on the links to go to the places that gives you the information you need. Wow. Okay. So anyway, wrapping up here. Happy New Year. Happy February. And enjoy the good news. Until next time, we'll see you in the newspaper.
Industrial hemp.
This episode of the Industrial Hemp Podcast is copyright 2024 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family. Today's show is written and recorded, edited, and produced by Eric Herlock. And the music you hear throughout the show is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow.